All right, welcome back to another episode of We All Speak in Poems. Today we're talking to TJ, aka Six Missing, an ambient artist and sound designer and mixer. In this episode, we're chatting about how he got into making music, the bands he was previously in, his life as a sound designer and mixer, all of his gear, and much more. I hope you enjoy it. So before this, I was looking a lot into, Six Missing and all the music that sort of happened before Intentions 2 and when you sort of started getting popular and stuff, or at least when I first, heard your music. And, there was a lot of like distorted guitar. It was almost not progressive. I'm already forgetting the word right off the first question.
I don't want to fill anything in. I want to hear what you were going to say.
Oh my God, I'm actually going to forget the word.
Like prog rock?
Yeah, and just it's like dreamy. It's like Pink Floyd. There's a genre they're in. I can't. Psychedelic. This is the word. Yeah, it's very psychedelic, ambient, cool stuff. And I was wondering, like, before Six Missing, is that what you were doing a lot in bands and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes and no. So that's kind of like part of the weird transition, I think, from coming from playing in bands with people and kind of having more traditional songs that were written, and being that I am a guitarist. That was kind of the journey. And all of those albums leading up to, I feel like Patricia was the first album that marked a real change in sound for me, at least from my perspective. It like felt like a change where the guitar was more secondary than the synthesizers. And yeah, I think leading up to it, it was all guitar. It was like looping pedals. For better or worse, I'm sitting next to like a stack of guitar pedals. And yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of about like finding your voice along the way. And I think when I started stumbling into guitar effects, I started to be able to create the sounds that I was hearing in my head more readily. And then all I really wanted to do is like sit down and play with guitar effects and play with pedals and all that. And the band stuff kind of fell to the wayside because, it's like any relationship. If you're not putting in the time to it, it kind of fades away. So that started happening. And I also wanted to leave that world, like doing traditional songs and playing sets over and over and over and packing up my stuff and hopping on a subway and taking it all. Like, it was becoming harder. Like, the more stuff I had, the more pedals I had and amps, and showing up to play the same set was just getting really boring for me. And I'd been doing it since I was like 12 or 13. I started kind of playing out. And so, yeah, the guitar stuff was kind of like a product of the old world that I was exiting and the new world that I was coming into, which was more this like instrumental soundtracky, psychedelic type of stuff. And I think that when I started finding modular rigs and racks and equipment and then synthesizers, I was able to finally like complete the picture of what I wanted my sound to really become, which is what it is more these days, which is more synthesizer stuff with maybe guitar textures or processing things with guitar pedals. But yeah, it was definitely, I mean, heavily influenced by Pink Floyd and David Gilmour and just like all of the music that I grew up listening to, which is something I wanted to ask you as well, as like what you listen to bring you to make the music that you make as well, because I always find it so varied amongst all of us ambient musicians. But for me, I grew up listening to like classic rock, and it was about like the guitar heroes. It was like AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. That was like middle school, high school, and then college became more of the like jazz train type of stuff. Coltrane, Miles Davis, Medeski, Martin and Wood, which then led to Nels Cline, which then led to me being like, yeah, I want to be an improvisational free jazz player and just start doing like noise rock.
Sick.
Which then brought me to effects and synthesizers and where we are today. So it's just like very indicative of the whole, feels like a scrapbook kind of getting to this point. What about you? I mean, what brought you to your sound today?
I think in the past I've described it as like, so I grew up on like metal music, essentially like the lower tuning, the better, and the faster, and then all of a sudden slower, the better as well. So like it was a lot less sludge. Yeah, exactly. It was a lot less like guitar hero, like noodling on the guitars, and more about the rhythm, like the syncopation and stuff for me. I also grew up as a drummer, so I feel like that makes sense. But you know, in these metal songs, there was always ambient interludes and outros that were like just atmospheric and sort of just added on to the song. You know what I'm saying? And so I started making music that sort of continued that. That was sort of my mindset, which brought me straight to here, right? Like I was making a lot darker music before, and now it's a lot lighter and a little bit more hopeful. But I guess it all also started like when I grew up in the time where EDM and stuff was becoming popular, and that probably added on to it too. Like all that stuff was dark too, you know? But yeah, it's kind of always revolved around that metal genre and more about, you know, rhythm and messing around with that. And I still do, even in my ambient songs. Like, of course, there's no like obvious rhythm, but I do compose rhythmically. You know what I'm saying? I don't know about you, but I look at the bars and I look at, you know, polyrhythms and how they can intermingle. And then I guess it all just gets washed away once we put 5 reverbs on it, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's really interesting to hear that you were a drummer. I was also in a metal band as well. We did a lot of like we were heavily influenced by like Iron Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, like that type of 80s metal type of stuff, melodic. It didn't hit as hard as like, well, I'm trying to think of like something else that we listened to, like Iced Earth or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I used to love that stuff. And like, you know, Metallica's Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets has such a near and dear spot in my heart. And like, that's the stuff like I don't always turn on and listen to, but when I do, I can like instantly transport back to that time, which is so fun. Which is kind of, funny because like I maybe you feel the same way. I don't really listen to ambient music. I make ambient music, but I try not to listen that much to my peers or contemporaries only because like I don't want to hear something that I want to be like, oh, I need to do that, because I feel like keeping everything so separate like that keeps everybody's voice really strong, which is not to say that I don't support friends. Like I listen to your stuff. I do listen to my friends' stuff, but I'm not like actively going out of my way to like listen to the brand new ambient thing. So I always find it also fascinating that like we're able to make a living off of this type of stuff because there are people that do listen to it. And I'm really glad that they do. I appreciate hearing that like you consider the rhythms and the kind of like the drummer's mentality in the composition, and hearing how like all of the music before that influenced you to get to this point, which is why I think your voice is, your musical voice is so strong and so unique in that sense. Mine, I think, is just a big wash sometimes. Like, I think it is just it's smeary, you know? And I think that that's kind of because of the way I produce and the way that I work, which is 99% of the time to no grid whatsoever. And if it is to a grid, it's usually just 120 because that's what Ableton opens up at, and I don't really bother to mess it, to change it. And I've gotten more on the grid since kind of getting into the modular Eurorack stuff, because you can send that information to the rack so easily. So I do let it do that. And because there is one kind of like tempo brain in my rack that controls everything else, I do tend to work to, I guess, a master tempo, but it's usually, I'm not quantizing to any grid or anything like that. I was talking to my friend Colette, who releases music as Golden, and she was saying the same thing, which is like, I come from such a world of like being in the band and like performing your part. Like when you go into the studio, it's always like, I'm going to play this section and let's just do it over and over and over until I get it. Or I'm going to do my performance start to finish and like, oh man, I missed that middle section. Let's punch it in. So like even MIDI for me, I approach as like a like analog instrument. Like I will re-perform MIDI instruments over and over again until I get it the way I want it, instead of just like figuring out the right quantize and swing and subdivision to like snap to the grid to, because I just feel like at that point it just gets too stiff, and I'd rather let it be kind of like breathing and alive in that way, in, you know, as much as a sampled instrument can, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've been recently like not using any MIDI whatsoever. Like I've been almost completely granular based for the better part of at least this year and maybe half of last year, you know, just focusing on recording samples and then manipulated them via granular synths. So like I used to have a big whatever was 61 key MIDI keyboard, and I recently downsized to the, what is it, like 28 keys or something like that, and I barely use it anymore unless it's really for bass or I'm composing for strings. And it's also got me off the grid. Like nothing's quantized anymore, everything's kind of random. That's the stuff that I've been really into lately. How do you feel about that though? I feel like you're very much synthesizer, clocking in, making sure everything is, what I'm trying to say is your stuff feels very composed. I don't know if you're trying to come off that way.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where like no matter what I have in mind, when I start sitting and actually putting the metaphorical pen to paper, like it always comes out like me, which is fun. And sometimes I think like people try to change that, and that's a great exercise as well. Like trying different things is awesome. I think that's really healthy and important to do, but I've stopped trying to fight that a little bit and just started embracing just the fact that like, this is the thing that makes me me, and this is the thing I know how to do at this point in time. So until I like learn something new or get inspired by reading or hearing or watching something, this is where I'm at right now. And so just approaching it like that has taken a lot of like pressure off. But from the compositional aspect of that, it's like, it's my background. It's like being in a band, thinking about it in terms of like, how is this whole thing going to come together, and where do I want all the pieces to kind of fit? And, you know, sometimes it is like shuffling puzzle pieces around until you get the right thing to like lock in. And other times everything just falls right into place. But to add to what you said, recently in the past few years, I have this like, I think this healthy blend of virtual digital instruments and analog real stuff. And that's what I'm trying to make, like that blend between of like machine and human kind of, like, you know, human in nature, and trying to figure out how to make all of that stuff work. I think that like there's something that happens when you take a super, you know, on the grid, arpeggiated digital synth and blend it with like an acoustic guitar or a piano or field recordings, or even just like a real analog synth that you're, you know, I have 3 over here, and 2 out of the 3 have no MIDI at all. They don't, it doesn't exist because they're from 70s and the 80s. So it's like, I love that. I love the fact that like, when you hear the performance, it is the performance, or you have to like punch in to fix it, or you have to like really sit there and like sculpt and figure out what you're trying to do and say with it. So I love that blend, like between the two things. And I guess just by kind of like doing that, the compositional aspect of it kind of just happens, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems more intentional. And I think that's something that you're really, really great at, is blending the acoustic versus electronic sounds. Like even just running stuff through tape, you have a great way of manipulating stuff through that, and allowing the organic sounds that other people might not enjoy, but letting them stay, you know, and sort of allowing them to be in the mix. You have a great way of, mixing that in. And that's inspiring.
Thank you
for sure.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's like, we were talking about this last time we spoke, but like how gear can kind of be this double-edged sword of being like something that is super inspiring, and, or it can be a problem, like that you just keep buying, hoping that the inspiration will come from it. So that's something also that, you know, I've been guilty of, earlier on in the Six Missing kind of story, was just like buying a whole bunch of gear or being sent it by people, which is a really great thing and a really like fortunate position to be in, that I'm really grateful for those companies that took a shine to it early on. But when you start kind of like putting your inspiration onto these other devices instead of letting them inspire you, I think that's the trap of purchasing gear. Not to get on a soapbox about that at all, but I will say, so like the stuff that you're talking about, like in the past couple of years, there have been pieces of gear that I've bought that have literally just written entire albums. And one of those was Norn's, which is just I don't even know, probably 2% of what the box can do or what the scripts even really are. And the people that dive so deep into it are like scientists. And also getting the Eurorack and the Tascam, the cassette deck, which is just such like old tech, but is just so full of character and like life and noise and instability, and it's like temperamental, and it's also like if you move the knob while the thing is happening, you're going to get like a static crunch. And I just think that like analog pieces of gear are just human, like they're alive and they feel so good, and like I don't know, I love working with those machines. And like now that's my problem, is like, I just want to buy vintage gear, like that's it, that's all I want to do.
Absolutely. Like now I have 3 of the Tascams.
Wow.
What are they called? The Porta Studios, the 414s. And on one of them, I don't know what's with the Tascams, but the 4th channel always goes on mine. I don't know why. But on the one that's beside me right now, every time you raise the volume a little bit on the 4th channel, regardless if there's any signal coming in or if there's anything on the tape, it gets the nicest, like glitchiest noise out of it. So I just sample it, like up and down, just sample it for like 30 seconds, run it through granular. And then you've got a really like unique sort of noise, and using these types of vintage gear as instruments is something that a lot of people are into, but I don't think a lot of people actually hone into it. Like, they'll have it and they'll know how to do it, but incorporating it into music is where things go awry. And I'm guilty of that too. Like, there's a lot of sounds that I know I can make that I just don't, because whether or not it's the signal chain is too complicated to, really sit down and get it or whatever. But it's definitely an interesting dilemma, and one I'm trying to personally work on a lot, but always fall back down that rabbit hole,
Yeah. And we were talking about that a little bit last time we spoke, was like, I find it so amazing when there are the unique pieces of gear that exist, like Norns, or like the the hologram microcosm, or maybe like Chase Bliss Mood or something like that. And like, it's really great to be able to like make glitchy, weird noises, but I've always appreciated the people that can take that a step further and like make those musical, or like build something out of that is like, oh wow, this isn't just like noise rock, this isn't just like glitch for the sake of glitch. It's like you're actually taking it a step further, using that as a true instrument. In the way that my brain works is like always thinking about it like you're in a band. Like, these are the other players in your band. And that's why I like the Eurorack stuff so much, because it's like generative music feels like a band member to me.
Okay.
And allows me to, it's like, that's the one thing that I miss the most about playing in a band, is like the collaboration of having people around you to hear something and then have that spark an idea in you that you wouldn't have had if you were sitting in your room by yourself. So as speaking like a true introvert, when I get to sit in my room by myself and have a machine throw an idea at me, that's been the biggest key to unlocking the creativity door for me in the past 3 years. Like, it really did help me by like giving me the space to like let something kind of just run on its own, and let me kind of like try things on top of it, or just sit and listen and like let your mind wander and see what starts to kind of like, what do you start singing in your head? What do you start playing in your head? What do you hear? So that like, I don't have to generate all of that creative energy up front. Like, I can just let, with some simple input, let this thing go on its own. Same with guitar pedals. Like, if you build up this loop that slowly degrades over time, or like you're saying with the granular stuff, or like Paul stretch or something, it's all just like, they're amazing writing tools. I like to think of them that way.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever really thought of it that way. I always thought of myself as like the conductor who is just letting it do whatever it wants. Because I really like when there's like mistakes in generative stuff or granular stuff. It's what makes it unique, right? Like, there's no point in using something granular when you can probably just make something pretty close to it with MIDI, putting clouds of MIDI notes or whatever. But it really is the randomness of it. Like, I got the Tasty Chips GR1, which was probably totally unnecessary for me, but it's really cool how it's so tactile, and like there's a knob where you can actually scrub the sample for the granular, right? And I've never been able to do that. Like, obviously we can do it with our mouse, but it's just so interesting, the stuff that comes up with it. And like,
it creates different ideas when the tactile like stuff. I don't mean to cut you off at all, but I feel so strongly about that. Like, and that's the thing, not to turn this whole conversation into like gear, but it's similar, like what you're describing. It feels like there's a Eurorack module called Morphogene that kind of does that. And it deals with, they call it splices and reels. So like you have your reel, and then within that you can create all of these small points, and you can scrub kind of over them forwards and backwards. And if you're capturing that, or in my case, all the time, putting that through a reverb and then recording it, you're just getting this unique texture that like no one can possibly have, because like you are doing that in the moment with that knob, letting it kind of, yeah, the way you said that is way cooler than I did, like the conductor of all of the machines. But that's the exact reason why, like, there are hundreds of Mini Moog VSTs, and they're all like, if you A/B them, they like, I cannot tell the difference. Like,
Exactly,
there is no difference at all. Like, technology is so amazing at this point. Like, you can get a Mini Moog plugin for probably $59 at this point. But I still went out, and when I saw a Mini Moog in the shop here at Switched On, I bought it, because having an actual knob and having a machine that is sitting in the room that you can smell when it heats up, and that you can like literally just feel, there's no comparison to me. Like, even though the listener probably can't hear the difference, like the writing process, the creating process is so much more fulfilling to like put your hand on a knob. It's
really interesting. It reminds me of when I was younger, trying to write drum parts, in like, I'm talking 13 years old. They weren't great or anything. On my drum kit at my house, I'm so familiar with it, but then I'd go to my friend's house, and on his kit, I would come up with something I would never come up with at my house. It's this weird thing of like changing setting and changing setup as well, and I'm sure it happens with guitars, but especially in studios like ours, like home studios, where friends have different gear and even different pianos. Like, there's different sonic characteristics, that inspire certain sounds. And I think it's really interesting. And it's honestly one of the reasons that I've steered away from getting more out of the box gear, like hardware, is because I find that I wait for that inspiration once, and then I like get so stuck on it that I can't use it again. You know what I mean? It's like the weirdest thing ever, and I hate it. But I find that I can get around that with software, because you don't have that same, I don't know, there's, like you were saying, like the same feeling almost.
Well, yeah, I don't have to tell you at all about the difference between like the software and the real thing. I mean, you're having like a real piano is, I mean, man, there is no difference. I mean, there are some incredible sample libraries out there, and all of the stuff that's out there for literal, no money that you can download for free is all amazing stuff to write with. And like, I don't know, maybe that's like something that if I were to like have a soapbox to stand on, I think that I don't want to come off as the musicians that is like, you need to have real gear to make music, and you need to have tens of thousands worth of equipment to make the type of music that, because so much of it is cost prohibitive, and like, we're both in our careers now, decades, and like, we've had the experience and the money and stuff like that to save, to invest in these things. So like, someone just coming out of the gate can't just go buy a Mini Moog. I know that. And that's also why I think I feel so special when you're able to do something like that. But yeah, the amount of resources that are available to like just free, just to get started playing music is mind blowing and so amazing. But yeah, to step back, I mean, you having a real piano, that's the dream. That's the dream, man. Like, having the real thing, it feels like it reacts so differently. Like, you can play the same melody on a VST that you could on a piano, and you will play differently. You will.
And I think it's the way that the sound interacts with the piano itself, right? It's like its own reverb chamber, kind of. But it's interesting what you were just saying. Like, I would stand on that soapbox with you, because for 75% of the time that I've been making music, I was only in the box. I don't think it was until I got a guitar like 6 years after Alaskan Tapes started, or maybe 4 years or something like that. That was my first like outboard gear, was a guitar that I'd never learned how to play, and then it was the piano, and then I only just recently started getting into the Tascams and the guitar pedals and the synths. I think, which is another reason why I'm trying to push it off so much, is because I know personally for a fact that you can get away with not having that stuff. And,
oh yeah,
you know, using Lab's soft piano for everything, you know, or whatever.
I was just telling my wife about this the other day. It's like so I don't just do Six Missing. I have like a sound design and mix company that I work in.
You're going into this because I was going to ask.
Yeah, so I do sound design and mix for film and TV and advertising mainly, and that was a byproduct of me needing to have a backup plan, which was that I grew up wanting to play music. I grew up wanting to always play music and make a living making music. It was been my dream since I started getting the Sam Ash catalog sent to the house, where I was like, I didn't even know how many strings were on a guitar. So like, that's how young I was. I was like, oh, well, I'll get an 8-string guitar because 8 must be better than 6. And then someone was like, there are only 6 strings on a guitar. You only need 6. Although your music, probably you had 8, or your band members probably had 8, yet down to like C sharp. But yeah, I mean, and so I needed, or was told that I needed, a backup plan, because making a living as a musician is terrifying and unstable and all of the fun adjectives. So the business side has been really busy. And I haven't had a lot of time to really just like sit and get inspired from other musicians, other creators, which is why I like social media to an extent, because it can be delivered to you in small snippets that are really great. But, you know, I'm going to make the leap here from what you were saying about like, you can do everything in the box. I was watching a great video from maybe like 10 years ago of Fortet, and he's talking about his live setup. And for one of the instruments that he has a PC, which is just running Cool Edit Pro, which is like a piece of software for Windows that came out in like the 90s. And he has a literal mouse connected to the computer, and it creates like stutter glitches and all of this stuff. And like, sure, there's probably like a max patch that you can get to map to a MIDI knob that you could have a controller on your computer to do that. But that's like the thing that he does, and that's his sound. And like, why would he change it to sound like somebody else? So I just, after I watched that, I was just like, oh, wow, that's great. Like, really just embrace who you are. And if you are like, you work in the box, and like be the best at working in the box. That's phenomenal. Like, really hone your sound that way. Like, you do not need rooms full of gear, as fun as that really is, but it can be handicapping sometimes. I think, as a break point here, we could talk about the work if you want. We don't have to.
Well, I just think it's an interesting point, like with your work, because you're doing both. Like, I think when people would look at Six Missing, they would assume that you're doing it full time. I think that's a general misconception on artists now, right? Is that we're all doing it full time, when vast majority aren't. Even your favorite artists probably aren't, at least in this genre, in the ambient genre. But going into your quote unquote day job, I wanted to know, like, did you go to school for like sound design and mixing and all this stuff, or did you just sort of work your way into it?
Yeah, great question. So I think that one of the biggest misconceptions, like you just said, is that in order to make it, in quotes, you have to dump all of your time and your money and your efforts into that one sole thing. And while that probably will work, like you probably will at that point, if you have the stamina and you have the drive and you have, more importantly these days, the funds to keep yourself alive and healthy while doing that, like you will make it. You will. You just need to keep going. But I think where a lot of people fall short is that race is not really like a a short race, it's a marathon. And I think you have to be really like kind of prepared to run that. And you don't just like off the shelf run a marathon. You have to train a little bit for that, or a lot bit for that. And something that I've wrestled with a lot over the past decade or so is this feeling of like, did I have an opportunity as a younger person who wasn't as high up in his career, his day job? Did I have this opportunity to really sink my teeth into something that then could turn into a full-time music career? And did I blow it because I had a plan B? And more and more I'm thinking, no, I didn't, because like, I think that it's just such a small percentage of people that will really, really make it, like the Billie Eilishes, the Taylor Swifts, the Olafur Arnolds even. Like there just needs to be this new mentality, or this new acceptance of like the fact that you can have multiple passions, you can have multiple interests, you can have multiple even hobbies. But I think the smartest thing to do, at least for me, is like to diversify that tree as much as I can. So like, I'm good at sound designing and mixing commercials. It is not something that I have like a undying passion for, but I'm good at it and I am paid to do it. So why would I turn it away to like focus on no, I have to focus solely on the music. I think that it's taught me how to create and manage my time better. Which is like, if I have too much free time, I get handicapped. I get paralyzed because I'm like, there are too many things that I want to do. So for me, I kind of like live and die by a calendar. And that's a newer thing for me, like maybe in the past like 8 years or so. But the fact that I have a day job allows me to almost be more focused and intentional with my time as Six Missing. And it's not as like, I want to complete something. I want to get something done. So there's unscheduled free time for just kind of like exploring sounds and everything. But when I sit down, it's kind of like, cool, let's use this time effectively. Let's focus. Let's turn off the phone. Let's like not be on social media. Let's dig in. And having that kind of like compression of time, I think has made the Six Missing writing muscle become a bit more toned and like focused than if it were just my soul thing. I think if it were just my soul thing, my squirrely mind would find a way to like make it so that it wasn't, or something like that. I don't know. So that was a tangent to your original question, which is, yes, I did study and go to school for sound design and mix. I went to Full Sail University in Florida. And I was fortunate enough to kind of like know what I wanted to do early on in the high school career. So like when all of my friends were studying for the SATs and really stressing about acceptance letters and all of that stuff, I was just like, cool, well, this is the school that does the thing and teaches the thing that I want to do. I wasn't always like the most focused in school, and I didn't do maybe the best in high school. So finding a program that was as intense as Full Sail was perfect. It was a 6 to 7 day a week, 16 to 18 hour schedule. It was a 24-hour school. So I had classes at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 9 a.m., 1 p.m., 9 p.m., 6 to 7 days a week for 12 months straight. And then I was out and I was in the working field. So I didn't have the traditional college experience, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't. Some days I wish I did, but yeah, it just gave me the ability to like get out there and start learning. So I learned the vocabulary to speak, to have the conversations, to get myself into the room. And then in the room is where I learned absolutely everything. Like it was just, yeah, all in the studio.
For sure. Yeah, that's really interesting because I kind of did the same thing. I went to a school called RAC for, I don't know what the actual program was called, but it was for mixing, engineering, and sound design. And we had this whole audio sort of program. And I always thought that, the thing that I got most from it was the people that I met in there were really cool, and they were all different genres and doing different things. And it was like opened up my mind to what could be done.
Well, did you go specifically for like music recording?
It must have been. I honestly can't remember what the program was called, but I'm really glad that Full Sail had like a competent program, that actually taught you a lot. Like it's really good to know, because when people ask me like, should I go to school for this? I'm always like, I don't know,
Same.
man. Like depends how much experience you have. I think that's normally the answer that I give. If you're really just starting, maybe it's the same answer,
Oh no, I know. I feel the same way. Like so I've been doing the sound design and mix stuff for 17 years, and
Oh, wow.
I'm only now 6 years into running my own business. So for a good decade, plus or minus some years maybe that I don't really remember, I was at companies. So like when people reach out to me now who are kind of coming at this stuff new, they're like, what should I do? Like, should I take a job at a company? Should I work for myself? Should I go to school? Should I just start putting myself out there? I'm always so puzzled, because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, because like, I don't want to sound super old, but like the world has changed a lot, even in the past 3 years. I mean, my industry was very fortunate during the pandemic because we could go remote pretty effortlessly. And like that same was not true for a lot of my musician friends who made their living on touring or being in studios, or even my production sound friends where productions shut down.
Yeah.
Post-production didn't, because we had animation. We didn't have to be in the same room as each other. You could record at home and send me the file, and I could mix the commercial and do the thing. It was like, this paradigm shift happened where remote work in my world before this was very unaccepted. And like, it was a bizarre thing. And like, I saw the wave cresting 6 years ago of when I left the last business I was at, where I was like, why am I sitting in this room? We're paying 40 grand a month to like rent this space. We have to charge what we charge, and people aren't even coming in there. We're doing everything over email and posting. And, I really wanted to make a change towards remote work, and a lot of my clients were unsure if that was going to work and if that was going to happen. And then 3 years later, pandemic happens and we're all working remotely. But so my point is like, I don't know what to tell people when they come in, like where to go. What worked for me may not work for you. Exactly. And what worked then may not work now. And to think that the systems and the way that things are set up are the same that they were even last month is just not true. So yeah, I feel you on that. I don't know what to say. It's like that. Just go your own way, go your own path, forge your own path there. Yeah,
for sure. I feel like the way that you're doing it too, most people focus on sound design, Foley, or at least these are the things that they want to be into, on-set sort of boom miking, stuff like this. But if it feels like, at least from your credits and stuff, that you've found a real niche just in mixing a lot of the time. And like, I feel like on all your credits, you're either doing mixing or mixing and sound design or mixing and ADR and all this stuff. How did you sort of fall into that? Was that intentional, or were you just sort of thrown into that?
So the short version is that I got an internship at a jingle house because I was still holding on to the idea that like, well, I'll take this job while I'm working on the music career, and let's at least find something that's sort of parallel a little bit. So I got into a jingle house where we would have session musicians come in and record these little advertising jingles for like, cat food and toilet paper and kids' toys. But the thing that struck me is that like the drummer from the SNL house band would come in and come sit down, look at a chart, bang it out in an hour, collect his fee, go on with his day. and the guitarist from like all of these 80s pop hits would come in with his guitar and guitar rig, not even an amp, sit down, pull up some settings, knock out some tunes, rip some solos and do this thing. So like I started seeing this other side to like being a musician and knowing that like there's another option for you out there. Like you could be a session player, you could write this type of stuff. So being that I was a musician coming into a jingle house, they naturally did mixing for the commercials. And we did a lot of radio, a lot of TV. And I just found a way in, kind of. I just started doing it and realized that like my organizational brain is really lit up by the idea of like a session is just like an unmixed project is just a room that you have to clean. And when I started thinking about stuff that way, like I think my brain just like went on fire and I was like, cool, like I get this. Like I see the matrix behind this. Like I know how to mix. So I don't want to work with musicians unless I'm the musician. So I don't want to do like sessions at 1 a.m. where the band's going to show up and want to party and you got to wrangle them. And there you are like texting your partner, telling them, well, I'm not coming home tonight. I didn't want to live that life. So doing the kind of like 9 to 6 commercial work just happened to be the thing that I really kind of like fell into and took a liking to. And from that, radio led to TV led to meeting directors and producers, doing short films led to documentaries led to long form television led to reality TV. So like, I don't discriminate. Like I just love sound. I love all forms of sound. Like textures. Voice is just another texture to work with. Like I just am, if I can be working with sound every single day, that would be my happiest. And I get to do that, which is like crazy. So I don't care if it's a 30-second commercial that somebody clicks past or waits until they can hit skip ad. It's like, I got to work with sound, so I'm happy on that. And yeah, so that's I don't know what the future will look like. I don't know where I'm headed with it. It's evolved many times over now as a business, and I'm not trying to control it. I just want to like see where it goes. Same with Six Missing stuff. Like I feel like I'm in a place right now where, like you said, it feels very compositional, and that's just what's coming out. Like it might shift to something different. I don't know. Might loop back around to the psychedelic guitar stuff, or it may not. I have no clue.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, good segue back into Six Missing stuff. I wanted to talk about, you do a lot of reworks and remixes and like collaborations. And as somebody who struggles so much with all of those, especially online, I want to know your workflow there. Like you just had a song come out with Golden, who you mentioned earlier, and like, so what was the sort of process there? Were you just sending stems back and forth? Were you having video calls? How in depth did you guys go?
So that specific one with Golden, it's called Pen Pal. We had kind of just through mutual friends met each other on Instagram, and she had been doing some stuff with like some singing bowls, and that's like a instrument and a texture and a sound that I've never personally worked with, so I was very intrigued by it. So I just kind of reached out, and I think it took us like a year of just like occasionally being like, oh yeah, we got to do something soon. We'll do something soon. And then just one day she was like, hey, I have something, like, how do you prefer to work? Do you want stems? And I just said, yeah. So just send me stuff. And I, that afternoon, sent her something back. And then after the fact, we had a video call to kind of just like introduce each other to each other and say hi. Yeah, stems is great. Stems are great. I did a record called Unfolding, which is with my friend Zach, who performs as Zach Caldwell, but also Fancy Colors. And he's an amazing pianist. So I had him it was like early pandemic. We were all at home. He had just recorded like 9 1-minute piano ideas. And I was like, just send them to me. And from that, I arranged full tracks out of just a stereo piano print by feeding it through different effect pedals and capturing that, and then feeding that through a different modular thing, and then creating arrangements from his original idea. And then I sent that back to him, and he put vocals and flutes. He sent it back to me, and I finished and mixed. And in 9 days, we did a track a day. We finished that record. Done. Like,
amazing.
It was printed, mastered. It was just ready to go. And so I am open to working in any way. I think that the reason that I like doing the reworks and the remixes and the collaborative stuff, again, harkens back to like working with band members and being a part of that process. Like, that's how my creative brain was formed, was like working with other people. Like, so when I get to do that, I think that makes me the happiest, because I don't always have, and maybe you feel the same way, but maybe you don't, because you are a piano player and like you have melodies and all this stuff. Like, I don't wake up with melodies in my head. Like, I don't hear always the song. And like most of the time when I sit down, the songs that become the record, like I had no idea that they were going to be what they were going to be until I started working on it. Like, I'm not that writer. I'm not that person. So I require input. And if that's from inspiration from watching like Olafur Arnold's walk me through his studio, if that is listening to a podcast with Rick Rubin being super Rick Rubin and being out there and weird, if that is reading a book that's like a sci-fi thing that makes me think about this tone that I hear or that is described in the book, if that's having a generative modular rack, guitar pedals, scrolling through presets until I hear something cool, or getting stems from another artist to hear where their head might be at, like, it's all good to me. Like, that's the way I work. I need the input to start the engine to go kind of into output mode. Sometimes it's there. Sometimes I wake up and it's just there, but most of the time I need that input. I don't know. Are you similar, or do you kind of wake up with the song in your head like McCartney?
No, almost never. I feel like that's happened like twice for me. I think like a lot of people, the way that you have to do it is just sit down and start working, and stuff will just sort of flow out. But even to get that inspiration to sit down and start working, for me, takes a lot. But I feel like I look for the sort of the same stuff as you, like even like you've already mentioned, Fortet's live reggae explanation. I've watched that 4 times. Or Arnold's studio tours, I've watched that 1,000 times. I look for stuff like that and reading a lot. And I'm at the point now where I'm just waiting for inspiration. I don't even sit down and write unless I'm like, I'm really feeling this, which is definitely bad. I feel like if you are put in a position that we're in, it's almost like an obligation to at least try a little bit every day. And I do not do that. It makes me feel horrible, which is fine. But
I wonder if I was going to say, I wonder if there's this really like weird kind of, I know I've talked about like handicaps a lot, but I wonder, like, there's this like hurdle, and I wonder if this exists for you and maybe other musicians. But like, one of the things that sometimes stops me from creating and actually having a session or writing that day or not is the idea sometimes, like, I think through all the way to the end, which is like, oh my God, I know how much time this is going to take me to get this idea out. And if I sit down and I start on this, I'm the type of person that, like, I won't go to the bathroom for like 3 hours if I'm writing. Like, I won't get up and refill my empty water glass, even though the kitchen is 8 steps away. Like, I am in it. And when I'm in it, I'm so strapped down into it that I could not sleep, not eat. And like, sometimes that whole mountain like stares me right in the face. And then I just go, I'm not going to sit down and do that. I'm not going to open Ableton. I'm not going to record. I'm not going to turn on the guitar. Like, I don't know if that has happened to you too.
Oh, 100%. Like, even I like to think of stuff in full projects, right? And like, so when I do write, it's very intentional.
Okay.
Like, I want it to sound like this so that it can fit as track 3 of this album. I typically have like the album title already ready before I've even started recording. I have like 6 album titles ready to go.
You're so much more organized than me. Oh my God.
I'm organized in the sense of full projects. When you actually go into the micro of individual songs and stuff, it is so disorganized and all over the place. And it's sort of like it's a mind block. And then also me with my like signal change, I'm like, okay, I want to sit down with the organelle today and make something just with the organelle. But then I have to plug it into my interface, and then I have to figure out which pedals I'm going to use.
Yeah.
Then where are my cables? I lost this cable, and I'm looking for that for 20 minutes. And I'm like, well, I guess it's not going to happen today.
Yeah, you are describing the exact thing that I was going to say before this is like, that is the big, if you had like look at, which you can actually do on my Spotify, like stats, you can see the moment that the studio changed for me. You can literally track it because it was kind of just hovering along, and then there is quite literally almost like a right angle that goes up out of nothing or very mediocrity to something that I'm feeling like is heading in the right direction. And for me, that shift came from having an actual space to set my stuff up versus sharing the second bedroom in our 2-bedroom apartment in Queens with my wife, who is, you know, we were really literally back to back. She was working on her computer, I was working on my computer, and it was like, I don't want to pull my pedals out from where I have them tucked behind my desk because that's the one spot in the room that they fit. So I don't want to bother her while she's like on the phone. So I don't want to play guitar. Yeah. I mean, if there was as much as like a cable that I had to plug in, that was enough of a hurdle for me to be like, it's not happening today. Like, it's just not. So I very consciously, because I feel like that's like a big thing for a lot of musicians. Big thing is like, if you've got to even plug one thing in, that's the difference between it happening or not. Mm-hmm. So when we moved and I got more space, it was a conscious and very tiring process of like, everything is plugged in at all times. Everything is wired. Everything is labeled. Everything, my session opens with a template of all of the things that I could possibly want to kind of like noodle with, and all of the sends are all set up to all of the external effects. So I can literally play a VST piano and send it to Norns or send it to Cosmos or the tape deck or the pedals or the Euro rack, and then capture that back in and feed that out to the reverb, and the synth can do, like, that was what I wanted to have happen. And that is pretty much like where everything, the door opened. And I see the importance of having those steps taken already. Because it's exactly like you said, like if you have to think about it, like that, it's a finger snap, really. Like it exists in a finger snap.
And I think this is the reason that I've been working mostly in the box again, is because everything is there, you know. I got the Tasty Chips GR1, which I keep talking about it. It's amazing, but they made a very crucial mistake, especially for somebody like me who, like we're saying, if there's one hurdle, I'm not going to use it. And that is that you can't sample into it. You have to load samples onto a USB.
Oh, wow.
That is the biggest hurdle you could ever think of.
There's no external audio in?
No, yeah. There's a USB port, so you can plug a interface directly into it, and then you can sample in that way.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? So what you have to do is export your samples, get them onto a USB, and eventually it'll end up working out because I have a dedicated hard drive now for it. So over the years, all of a sudden I'll have everything ready. But to just, doing it, I'm like, oh my God.
That's a workflow shift. And that's a big boat to make turns with, habits and workflow. That's crazy. I didn't know that. Wow. Interesting.
It's a real issue. And I've been thinking about, setting up my studio to be completely, like you're saying, everything labeled, everything set up all the time. But I work in FL Studio, and it's very not like that. It rewards you for being in the box, you know? Not that you can't do everything that we're talking about in FL, but, you know, it's a beat maker's program for the most part. So it's one of these things,
But that's one of the beautiful things too. Like that's another question. I don't know if you get asked that, but I feel like people that are newer, that are looking to kind of like equip themselves in the right way, they'll ask like, well, what DAW should I learn? And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't. I think in post-production, it matters. Like you should be Pro Tools literate because that's what everybody works in. And it's just that it's like it or not, you have to learn Pro Tools. Yeah. So I am a dual DAW user. Like I use Pro Tools to do mixing, and I use Ableton for music mixing and music composition. But like I only recently taught myself Ableton 6 years ago. So I was creating everything in the sterile environment of Pro Tools. But that's really cool to hear about FL Studio. I know some people use Bitwig, and Studio One is another one that has been recommended to me by PreSonus. But I don't know anything really about that.
Yeah, I remember when Bitwig and Studio One were coming out a couple years ago, and their big things were collaborative. You know, there's like built-in collaborative efforts, I guess, where you can connect to somebody else at the same time. I don't know if this is actually a thing, and that was the only reason I was even thinking about doing that. But then I realized I'd never do collaborations, so I'm not gonna.
Did you like come up on FL Studio?
Yeah, it's the only DAW I've ever used. Well, I am Pro Tools literate as well, and I know semi how to use Ableton, and I've tried switching to Ableton 100 times. But you know, it's so ingrained in me, FL's workflow and all this, and it works for me. Like there are a few shortcomings, but with every new update, you know, it's getting closer and closer to where it should be. Like, you know, even just in samples, every other DAW had it where, you know, you can easily just drag like a fade in so that you have no zero crossing or whatever. Only with the most recent update did they add that. You always had to add an extra automation clip to have,
my
which
goodness
I got
gracious.
used to.
Oh wow!
But now that I have the other, you know, automatic thing, it's like night and day. I can't believe they didn't have that before.
That's pretty crazy. I did not know that. I feel like DAWs are like languages. Like it doesn't hurt to know a few of them. Oh, and Reaper is another one that always comes up, and I think that is probably because of Tycho, and
the fact that it's free.
And the fact that it's free, yeah, or it could be free. It's donation based, maybe, I think, but so free. But yeah, I don't think there's any harm in learning as many as you can, because then also you get you start to find what works for you, and that was the other big change for me, was like leaving it was almost like having a different office for me. Like I work in Pro Tools, so I'm always associating it with kind of like work. So my brain, that part of my brain is like, you know, very goal orientated. And then when I moved to Ableton, I was like, oh, this is play. So I have work and I have play. And when I got into Ableton, I was like, I'm not somebody that I don't learn by reading manuals. I just don't. Like it's not how I am wired, and I don't have the patience for it. So like Ableton was so accepting to just like a musician's mind, in my opinion. So it was very easy to learn, and it was also just like another creative door unlocking. And yeah, that's when I was like, oh yeah, you can just learn a bunch of them. Learn them all if you want.
There's a feature in Ableton that I learned about today that I didn't know was a thing, and I don't think FL can do it. And if they can't, they should definitely add it in the future. And that's, you can convert audio
to MIDI,
harmonized audio to MIDI. I saw that in a video today, and my mind, that he converted strumming patterns on a guitar to MIDI. Yeah. And I said, what? That's insane. And then he made that MIDI into like sine waves, so it, you know, sounded really nice. And I was like, that's a track, like
Right. Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
I mean, my mind was blown.
Ableton is so deep. And I think even in that Fortet video that we're talking about, the like Red Bull Academy one, he even says that. And I was like, oh, I feel so seen. He's like, I use Ableton for like 1% of what it can do. And if he's using it for 1%, then I feel like there's no way I'm even at 1% of what I'm using it for. I'm still using it in like arrangement mode, so still linearly. I'm not using it in the clips mode where you're just loops. I started that way, but you get stuck in just 4-bar loops and you can't ever finish a song. So I still use it like Pro Tools, but in a way that is much more, I don't know, it feels like a sandbox, like a play box for me. Like you can be really adventurous with it. And like you said, like doing unique things, like converting even your voice, singing a melody into MIDI so that it can help you like figure out how to play that part. I'm all about that. I think like, yeah, the more unique and different you can be as an artist is like the route you want to take.
For sure.
Coming from somebody that has probably 30 songs that might all sound like the same.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, as soon as I saw that, I think, I'm going to download Ableton again for the 5th time. And I'm going to try it out again because I think the last time I used it was years ago. And I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that the signal chain or the effects chain was at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
Where FL is kind of like Pro Tools in the way where you have your mixer and then the effects are with each channel, and maybe they change it. Maybe I was overthinking it.
No, you're completely right. Time. That's probably just like visually the biggest difference between it is just like, and that's usually the biggest difference between all that stuff. I don't know what Logic is like, but I've never opened Logic, but I would imagine that they're different as well. But it looks maybe more like their track-based stuff is more like Pro Tools. Wow, sure. super fun stuff I'm talking about right now, right? Yeah, everybody.
Dude, this is the most interesting stuff I've ever talked about. Like honestly, but getting to the end of it, I wanted to ask, what you're currently working on, what you're excited about with Six Missing.
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening in the world of Six Missing. I have a piece that I'm working on right now that is actually something that I was initially not very excited about because it was out there and in the hopper and primed for release, had a release date, had artwork, had a title, had songs, mixed, mastered, everything literally in my Spotify for Artists and in all of the distribution places. And I pulled the plug on it. It was actually supposed to come out last week, which I don't know when this podcast will air, but this that would have been April 7th.
Oh, wow. So I didn't realize that.
It was gonna come out, and it is the first time that I pulled the plug on something at that stage. And I just kept coming back to it and listening to the mixes and the masters, and something about it just felt very unfinished, and it felt like they were a whole bunch of sketches and demos, which earlier Six Missing would have been like totally fine with, because early Six Missing had like 19-minute tracks. But as I started growing and becoming more intentional and more focused in this, I decided to like pull it off the shelf and put it back into the studio, and partly because of exciting stuff that I have going on with Network, which is that we're going to put this record out, release to be determined. But it gave me kind of the drive to make the best possible product and songs that I could, to make a, first good impression with working with a new partner. And also knowing that if all goes according to plan, the music will be heard by more ears. And how do I really want to make this kind of second first impression as an artist? And it just didn't feel good to know that I was going to be putting something out that was like, eh. So I pulled it, and what ended up happening after, we've had some conversations and some creative chats, I used I used all of the finished tracks. I went back into the original sessions and used the end point as the start point for new pieces pretty much overall. So it was like digital compost, I think. I was kind of upcycling the material into becoming the starting place for something that I'm really feeling good about and really excited about, and like is really inspiring to like sit and write. Like I have over the past month, I basically haven't slept. Like I've been so excited to like get into the studio and have that free hour to like work on this track and then sit and make notes and like doing all these things that I would have never done before, like actually like really thinking and being intentional about each sound that's in there, which before I would have been a little kind of like, just let's throw it out there and see what happens, which I guess you could say up to this point has been part of the journey. But like, I want to do something different this time. I want this to be really special. I want this to be something that people hear that don't normally listen to ambient music and that would hear it and be like, oh, is this what ambient music is? I really want it to be like important and special, and it feels like that's what's happening. And I think that the fact that I made that change was kind of like the universal click that happened, where it was like, cool, we're going to make this happen now, because you passed the test. Like you didn't put out shit, and you want to make it nicer. So again, another long-winded answer to your question is yes, I'm very excited about what's coming up. Hopeful that it'll be sooner rather than later. But the record is almost done, and it's going to be really special when it comes out.
Absolutely. And as somebody who's heard both versions,
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you definitely have.
It's interesting hearing it, because when a lot of people put out music, including myself, we always say like, it's as done as it's gonna be, kind of thing. You're never totally satisfied, right? But I feel like what you did was you got to that point and then you said, wait a minute, I could actually make it better. And it's night and day how good it is. Like I was really surprised when I heard the sort of reworked versions, the current versions of them. They're, like you said, it's definitely going to be something special. Like it's really, really good.
I really appreciate that. There's a comedian that I won't mention his name because he's been in headlines as of the last few years of being maybe not the best person. So I won't mention his name, but he had said, I'd heard interviews about him, and I think that his work ethic, as far as his work goes, is really admirable, because he will start his new hour of comedy with his last joke. So by the time you get to the end of the set, like you're at the bottom of the ninth, you're up for like the plate clearing homer, like the last joke has to be the one that everybody goes home thinking about. So it's like, if you're starting with the best possible one that you had, you now have to become even better than that. And you're just continually like pushing yourself to be better than you were before. That whole thing has stayed with me for a really long time. And I'm not saying by any means that's like what I'm doing, but that's what I thought about on this go around, is like, okay, if that was what at the time I felt was my best, like let's take it and let's use it as the starting point. And basically like you just have to get okay with like destroying it to make something better.
For sure. That totally makes sense. I love that. And with that note, I just want to say, thank you. And this has been a really great episode.
Oh man, thank you so much for asking me to do this. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening to another episode of We All Speak in Poems. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate a follow or like. We'd also like if you went and listened to some of Six Missing's music and give him a follow as well. Catch you next time.